Good evening and welcome to tonight's governing board meeting. Let the record show that all 5 board members are present and accounted for. Mrs. Sagata-Jones, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. No, we do not.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Yeah. Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Was there a second?
Yep, there was.
Yes, her mic was off.
Yes, we did.
Okay, aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson? Aye. Chair votes aye, motion passes. Please join me in a moment of silence, followed by the pledge. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will move on to item 2, which is our study session and how we're starting tonight's meeting. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, good evening, Madam President, members of the board. We're here tonight to present to you the recommendations for the boundary proposal. We have with us our demographer, Rick Bramer, and also joining us is GSD data architect, Nick is with us here as well. At this time, we're going to refer you have the actual PowerPoint with you, a copy, and then we will go through that slide by slide on the screen. I want to make sure that we all understand the purpose of this. Is it up there for us yet? Okay. At our last governing board meeting, we had the conversation about declining enrollment, and then also with that, what we would need to do to address some of the anomalies and boundaries. And we were given by the governing board the direction to go ahead and look at the boundaries and really do what we could do with them to make sure that we weren't repeating year after year. So that is the attempt that we've done. The purpose of this demographic and enrollment analysis for Glendale Elementary School District is to identify the current historic demographic development and enrollment trends, address inefficiencies and trends in declining enrollment for the last decade, and then project future enrollment trends to ensure financial solvency. So as we began this journey a while back, we are now in phase 3. We did have a little bit of an interruption due to the pandemic, but we are back on track with phase 3 for the 2020-21 school year. Analysis of boundary changes to optimize the program services for students in special education was completed, as we shared last time. We did the analysis of sale and/or lease of land. We formalized requests to School Facilities Board to replace schools. And then we began with the analysis of boundary changes to optimize program services for general education students, and then the reanalysis of staffing models all fall under phase 3. This then takes us right into the boundary proposal. We're looking at the next steps, which mean of our phase 3 that we need to do the analysis and repurpose of and/or closure of schools determined by life of facility, program changes, statutory requirements, declining enrollment, and population density throughout the district. So the goals that we have in front of us this evening, in which that's what our demographer and our architect were given to know what the outcomes should be. So GSD will ensure financial solvency by providing the community a multi-year process of reorganizing boundaries and repurposing schools by June 2021. GSD will provide a plan for academic alignment to address the achievement gap by providing a multi-year process of implementation of rigorous teaching and learning systems by June 2021. and GESD will be able to process for ensuring and implementing a system of care for the students, community, and staff throughout the district by June 2021. Those are those goals. So what you're going to see, we've highlighted some of the key points within the proposal. I'll go over those with you, then I'll turn it over to our demographer and our architect. Utilize 1920 grid codes counts for the data. That's what was done. Boundaries do not cross Grand Avenue. That was what we wanted to make sure was not happening. Grid code counts are based on addresses, the attendance area. This means internal open enrollment is not a factor in the numbers. Internal meaning kids, for example, they may live in the attendance area of Jack, but they go to Sunset Vista. That was not included because they are internal. Counts do not include out-of-district open enrollment numbers. Maximize efficiencies such as facility utilization was one of the things they had to look at, and then move to all K-8 sites. We shared with you research that you received in your board packets. We asked you to look at about what research does say on the K-8 model. At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Jerry Peterson and Gravaya, and he will go over what the research does say and then answer any questions you have about research on K-8 models.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sakata Jones. As the superintendent stated that some research was sent to you, that research, which is also posted on in the board agenda, it's interesting because that is kind of the culmination of a lot of the research. There's not a ton of research on the models in elementary schools, and my guess, just as my own hypothesis of that, is because so many of the models on the East Coast are not the same as on the West Coast. And you'll see that whenever you talk about unified school districts versus elementary and high school districts, even that kind of stuff, it's different on the East Coast versus the West Coast. And so it's a lot of the research that comes out of the East Coast doesn't deal with elementary districts versus high school districts, which we have more so on the West Coast. So it's just interesting. But those of you who read through the research, you'll notice I have about 6 things that popped out of all the research, the trends or the synthesis from the data that was collected from those research studies. One is if in a K-8 elementary setting versus a whatever other kind of form you might have, some of the pros in a K-8 setting is that there's a heightened sense of collaboration with teachers throughout in a vertical sense and a horizontal sense. The transition, as you probably read in the research, transitioning is usually always detrimental to students on a general sense, whether it's from 8th grade to 9th grade, 9th grade to 10th grade in the old days, kindergarten to 1st grade if it's a different school, 3rd to 4th grade, sometimes in our district, and you actually see that in our district data as well, is that whenever there's a transition, it becomes a little bit harder for students. And so having a K-8 model would lessen those transitions. The academic achievement in some of the studies that had academic achievement attached to it was more positive in a K-8 setting versus a split school. The social environment was more positive specifically for the middle school or junior high students, or those grade levels in those middle years. There's a greater sense of school community because siblings are tending to go to the same school then in a K-8 setting versus in our district. The example is a different school at a K-3. My sibling might go to K-3 school, but I go to the 4-8 school instead of the same school campus. And then schools tend to be closer to your home when it's a K-8 setting versus reconfiguring the number of students that go to a 4-8 setting, so that it pulls from a larger demographic area sometimes. So those are some of the positives that were in the research that you may have read. But one of the cons that popped out of the research was dealing with that transition. And you can see that if you have a K-8 model, one of the cons, and I don't think it's really a con of a K-8 model. It's just the con of a transition from the 8th grade to the 9th grade. So if you have a K-8 model, I'll back up a little bit, but if you have a middle school model or a junior high model where it's just a middle school and just a junior high, like just 6-8 students or just 7-8 students, like we used to have in our district, a lot of times those are built as junior highs in all that that means organizationally, not just that students get to take classes from different teachers, but they travel maybe as a cohort or maybe not. Maybe they switch classes and switch peer groups per class. So it does, it mimics high school more so in historical data with the configuration. So the concern, or a con, if you call it that, would be how do you create that sense of getting ready for high school in a K-8 campus so that students aren't negatively affected once they get to 9th grade. So that it's not a surprise to them that all of a sudden they don't just have one teacher all day long and they have, or one group of students all day long that they hang out with. It's a little more, there's more movement and more choice too. So that's another piece of it is, are there choices for students so that when they get to the high school, they're not dumbfounded by all the choice that they have for electives, that do they have that opportunity at a K-8 setting? And so, versus a junior high setting, by the way, how it's built. Traditionally in our district, as you know, those of you who have students at a K-8 school, we've treated those as elementaries, and have tried and have started to work through the process of really getting that middle school year to transition better to a high school setting than just keeping like your homeroom teacher all day long in an elementary school. But the last piece of the research that you didn't have in your research, but we went back into our accountability system data by the state since 2011. And what's interesting is that since 2011, when there was an accountability system for K-3 schools, 4-8 schools, and K-8 schools, the grades that were assigned to schools based on the student achievement data fluctuated more. You might be a B one year, then a C the next year, then a D the next year, then a B. Or like it fluctuated more in our K-3s and 4-8s than it did in our K-8s since 2011. And then I guess the other thing with that is that the state has since 2017 has not come up with a K-3 model for accountability. So our K-3s have been frozen with their letter grades that they were given almost 4 years ago. And I don't want to speak for the state, but I can't imagine that that's going to be fixed anytime soon. And so it doesn't help when you're trying to move forward and move schools forward when there's not something that you can use for accountability purposes. And that's the case that it is for us in our K-3s currently.
Dr. Peterson, if I may, also historically when we looked at that data, our K-8 schools did outperform our K-3 or 4-8 schools. So with that, and there's a lot of reasons that can be contributed to that, but we do believe part of that is articulation, is vertical articulation between grade levels as well. But historically, when we look back at that, 4 of those settings of the K-3, 4-8s, those were D schools with the exception of 1. So our K-8s did outperform for various reasons. Okay, with that being said, next we're going to go ahead and dive into the boundaries. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Berrigan at this time.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, you do have a familiar face here with Rick and applied economics, and I think this might be the 3rd or 4th, maybe even 5th presentation over the last several years on enrollment. We're going to really take a collaborative approach in this presentation. The superintendent, Dr. Peterson and Corvaya, Rick and Nick will also have a portion in this presentation. and we will all just add supplemental information as we go through this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and Rick's going to present some information that may be familiar. We're going to reiterate some of that information and then just really highlight some data that's going to be useful as we go through this discussion. So, and I'm going to grab that remote from the superintendent here, and we'll turn it over to Rick here.
Thank you, Mark. Madam Superintendent, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, we're back here together again to look at numbers. Since we were here about a month ago, we have done, at least a limited amount of the update of the report. There's not, much in terms of updating, in terms of real estate and so forth we need to do right now, because those aren't really the subjects that we're most interested in. But we did get new enrollment information put into the projection model and ran it out forward. And it got some interesting things, I think, to share with you relative to that. You can see the blue bars, as I've described before, are the 40th day head count enrollment. The number this year is down. Sure.
I'll switch it.
Like that. This math doesn't help, I know. The number this year is actually down about 1,100 students. We had projected about a 300 student decline, so 800 more than the projection, and we'll see almost all of it, or most of it anyway, COVID-related early grades, almost all of it. But what it leaves us with is this reality here and now of the fact that at 10,300 and change, we're now 100 students below what the enrollment of the district was in 1995-96. And so as you go forward, we kind of look backwards at all the data that I had. So this is the same chart, except going all the way back to 1995. And so, it shouldn't be a surprise that we have excess capacity in the facilities, because we had to build space for 4,000-ish students who were basically no longer in the system. And with the uncertainty of this year, we're not sure, as much as we are sometimes even, in how much is going to hold or decline next year or come back. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit more detail
Mr. Bramer,
in a minute.
And also when we were going through this presentation, we were sharing the data, and Rick, I think Mr. Berrigan is the one who was like, we were a little bit shocked when he shared that our enrollment was what it was back in 1995 and 96. That's a very long time ago. And with that being said, that means during that time we were operating with 13 schools, and we're below that right now. Here you can see those schools which were in session during 1995-96.
And it's unfortunate because, the school-age population, I haven't shown that in here, but school-age population in the district has dipped some. But the real reason that we're sitting here and the real reason we're doing this is because of charter schools. Plain and simple. That's really been what's made this happen. So I compared where the projections from last year, that's listed under the 2019 update, to our latest projection from last week. So it doesn't, the COVID thing is a blip of sorts. We don't know how big of a blip for how long. But it doesn't change, the message here is it doesn't really change the overall trajectory of where the district is heading. It just means that we had a much bigger loss than we're anticipating last year. And if I'm correct, at least something of a rebound next year. But then, that's where the green line goes back up closer to the red line. But there's no reason to believe that we're going to exceed that, and there's nothing fundamentally has changed. And now we're coming from a lower, less certain basis than we were a year ago. And that's one of the things I want to talk about, and it's one of my last slides for today, really, is just looking at the distribution, again, of enrollment by grade. And so if you see, like the kindergarten this year, 910 students. Yes, it's been falling over recent years, but but nothing like that. And you see that, you know, basically kindergarten, first and second grade, major declines. And in the chart then at the right, where we're plotting it out by enrollment by cohort, you can see the kind of dip that the K2 group took this year. And what all the yellow is about is that I've had to, you know, basically go in and override all of my models, because we're not going to just simply think that we're going to base next year on around 900 kindergartners. We're not going to simply progress 900 kindergartners. So we've had to go in and make some, in some cases, educated guess, I have to say, about how many we think will come back and in what grades will come back. And I think we talked about before that since kids in Arizona aren't statutorily required to attend school till 7, we could get kids back next year in kindergarten, first grade, and perhaps even second grade that we haven't even seen before. So it's going to be kind of a wild ride, but again, it doesn't change the overall trajectory. The only thing else I'll bore you with on this slide is if you look at the 2020-21 line and go over to the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because most districts, see how last year we had 1,313 fifth graders, and that became 1,221 sixth graders? That's not our pattern. That's not when we usually lose kids. And in fact, most districts didn't lose that many at that level because of COVID. But what I see is things like the Academy of Math and Sciences coming online and really now focusing not just on the lower grades, but focusing on those middle grades. And I think, you know, if it may just be another thing that supports the idea of going to K-8s, because that's what charters do. That's the environment they're offering. And like it or not, it seems to be what people want right now. So those 6th, 7th, and 8th numbers almost spook me more than the big losses in K2, because I know why that happened.
Mr. Berman, if I may as well, and I do appreciate that about the charters, because they were very smart in doing K-8s to keep them together. What we did do, and Nick helped us with that when we were trying to look at open enrollment from outside, not within. We were trying to see, he was able to find all of those students and then pinpoint them by address. And they were, it appears they lived in a district south of us. And so we looked to see what were the nearest schools. And this, I have no data to support this other than what we looked at. And when we looked at those addresses and we looked at the neighboring schools, those schools in which kids were should have attended in that district south of us were schools that were a K-5. So our guess is they came to us, chose not the charter, but wanted a K-8 setting. And that was interesting to us as well.
That's good. So just as a refresher for starting us into the next part of the conversation really is the current attendance areas we have and the existing schools that are in play. And as Mr. Berrigan alluded to, this time we really did take a team approach to this, because I know one little part, basically, of this puzzle. I know how many kids live where and how many are likely to in the future and how many have in the past. But when you saw the other criteria, like the condition of the facility and all those other factors you need to take into account when you're thinking about, you know, changing these boundaries or closing schools, so we needed to work collaboratively on that. And through that process, I did an iteration, district inside did some iterations, we shared our thoughts, and came up with basically this, whoops, I'll go back one, at least the recommendation that we have for you today, which brings us back to 12 schools, which is much closer to what we had in 95, 96. And unfortunately, that means repurposing, you know, about 5 schools, 2 on the east side of Grand Avenue and 3 on the west side of Grand Avenue. And like I said, Nick McGann, is that how you say your name? I'm sorry.
McGann, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Nick. Really did the grunt work. So he took on the task of shuffling all of these grids around as many different ways as Mike could think of to try to come up with the best way to serve the school, to serve the students, and get our utilization numbers up. And that's kind of where I think I'm going to leave it, because I think that's about as much as I know.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones. I think it's going to be important that the board understand the current attendance areas. And I think as the superintendent articulated earlier, is there was goals around this approach. And she talked about the efficiencies and making sure that we weren't crossing Grand to, again, maximize efficiencies overall. And so I would, as we go into the next portion of the presentation, just understand that current attendance areas, when you look at schools like Ines and the Sunset Vista portion, they're taking, we're going back and forth between east of Grand and west of Grand to accommodate some of those current schools. That's going to be important for you to understand what that's going to look like in this next slide that Nick's going to take over, because those are critical. And it really helps shape the conversation as we go through that. So just please keep that in mind. And then I'm going to turn it over to Nick. He may drive directly from that laptop so that we don't have to change the clicker. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Again, my name is Nicholas McGann, software data architect here at Glendale Elementary. So I'm going to present on the recommendation proposal and what it means data-wise. And so as we go through this, it's going to be numbers-driven. We're going to look at the numbers, what the proposal means. As we go to the next slide here, you can see this is the current grid counts of the attendance areas. Again, touching on the point that Mike said, these are attendance area counts and not enrollment. And that we are looking at the 1920 data. And those are key points to keep in mind here as we're looking at this data. This is the current breakdown. And as Mike talked about, those key points that we were looking to improve on, crossing Grand Avenue, as well as, so like the example would be here, crossing Grand, or even jumping schools to pull in grids. There's another inefficiency that we wanted to improve on, as well as utilizing the buildings to the best of their ability. So improving on the utilization was also something that we wanted to look at. And so as we go to the next slide, this is going to be that recommendation, same numbers, but with the recommendation grids and what that count looks like if we restructured to this proposal. And so as we peel back those items, those key items, there were things that we started with. And so when you cross Grand, when you peel that out, that opens up grids such as this one up here, 304, which was assigned to Sunset Vista, now needs an assigned school. So starting with these larger numbers, such as this grid, which is grid BB, where does it go? And so those are the items that we started with. What's the closest school on its side of Grand? And that would be American. So if we assign it to American and fill in the grid, because again, we don't want to jump over grids to assign schools. So we kind of follow through from American. Follow through from American to that grid, and then see where we're at. See how the efficiency compared to the capacity, and we'll take a look at the capacity here in a couple slides. But as we were structuring this, those were the items we were looking at. And so when you do that with American, it's pretty much at its capacity. And then what follows then is Landmark, utilizing Landmark to the best of its ability on the east side with the greatest capacity. And so that's where we fill in from where American basically left off down to Burton. And Burton was being well underutilized. And so how does Burton then expand? And then that's where it can also then move up north on its boundaries and still be relatively at the same efficiency as Landmark and American. We're working at about an 80% efficiency now at those three schools, and that left Horizon just to basically expand in that square shape and pick up those leftover grids. And that left the entire east side about 81% efficiency combined. So each of those schools are all about the same on utilization. So that was the logic and what the data basically told us on the east side. The west side was a little bit more difficult due to the area where Smith, Menzendick, and Jack is so highly populated, and the previous way that it was structured wasn't very organized. And so we wanted to also improve on that. And so starting again, similar to what we did up here, when you peel back and you say, okay, no, you're not going to cross Grand anymore, that left these three grids open for needing assignments. And so the next logical school for them to go to would be Smith or your Jack and Menzendick. Smith was chosen due to the high numbers where Jack and Menzendick would also have to accommodate that were right next to them. And so Smith had the capacity to come down and pull those in. And once we've done that, then we talked about that K-8 model. And so Jack and Menzendick have their own separate boundary lines, and they're each a K-8. And then once we've done that, that kind of just sweeps across the rest of the district, and everything else just kind of falls in line, where South and North would be combined into South, Challenger and Garden would be combined into Challenger, and then the rest of the grids just pick up the leftovers and kind of just move in between there. So that's what the numbers and the data told us on that. That was, again, looking at the 1920 year. And so we also want to look at, assign those grids, what does it look data-wise in the projection of 10 years from now. And so with help from Rick, when his projection numbers, we just fed those grids in, and this is what it would look like over time. And so, again, we built those current grids that you were just looking off of at the 1920, and then everything else after that is based on Rick's projections. You also see here that the capacity, and so you can review back to the capacity compared to the count, but here in a minute, then we'll look at the actual efficiency that makes. But before I do that, I just want to note, if you look at South, the capacity is 870, and on the 1920 year, it's over capacity. And so I'm going to just turn it over to Mike real quick to touch on that.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, I'm going to elaborate on this slide. You can see that the 1920 attendance area column, and I'm just going to pick, even if you just take Landmark as the example, based on the data, there's 1,059 students within those grids. And I'm just going to jump 9-10 years later, it's going to drop to 815. And you can see that pretty consistently through all the school sites. The one that seems to be have some level of perhaps more consistency would be South. And as Nick pointed out, we do have the the capacity at 870. And the whole idea is that we're taking the North kids, placing them at South. And so what we're going to be monitoring is the decline in the enrollment, what that true number really is, and depending on what that need is going to be for that grid, we would then make additional accommodations on that property to support and address the additional students. Obviously, in an ideal world, when you talk about facility utilization, you want to be at 100%. And for various reasons, you may or may not accomplish that, but the goal is to try to get there. So we're going to elaborate, I think, a little bit more on the next couple of slides. So if there's additional enrollment that is needed to accommodate those students, we would have additional, we would add wings to South to accommodate that potential enrollment. And again, we're going to elaborate on a couple of different scenarios as we go to the next couple of slides. But we wanted to point that out, highlight that, and just really see where we're at right now and what that proposal would be in 9 years from now. And you can just see for the most, pretty consistently, even after this proposal, they're going to decline it, but you're still going to gain more efficiency overall than the current setup of our district.
So going off of that, Mike was talking about the utilization. And so to review, this would be if we did nothing. On the current setup, moving forward, you see the projected utilization. So highlighting again 1920, we're starting at the high 50s, 10 years projected, tailing off at the high 40s. So just as a review, using the projected proposal, or using the recommended proposal, this is with the projection on utilization reconfigured. So again, highlighting the 1920, we would jump to the high 70% on utilization of the district. Again, I talked about the east side. We were able to, if you highlight the landmark, Burton, American, Horizon, get up to that 80% efficiency on the utilization. So just touching on that. But as we talked about, this is a little inflated due to South, just because of the numbers. Using South's capacity, overutilizing that in the number, made the total go up about 2 percentage points compared to if we looked at it at South being 100% utilization. And so just keeping that in mind as we look at those numbers. We also then, in the next slide, did a little different comparison here where we actually used North's capacity, because that's kind of where we wanted to go with in South, is to increase its capacity with those buildings and get to a capacity such as North's, which is currently 1,020. And so you could see here a little closer to that 100% utilization on what those numbers would look like. Again, great improvement, as Mike touched on, even in the 10-year point compared to the other one, where we're tailing off at a mid 65% on the projection 10 years from now, which is even still better than what we're currently at in our current setup.
Yeah, so we do believe, Madam President, members of the board, slightly inflated. My guess is 2 to 3% potentially, but even when you take that into consideration, just take 2 to 3 points off that 65.21%, you're still gaining at least what we think might be at least 13% utilization efficiency compared to where we would be now in 9 years from now at 49%. So again, you're gaining efficiencies in the best possible way under the current circumstances.
So this slide here demonstrates, or just shows the data. Something that we didn't want to lose sight of was GEO, and what numbers or student counts in those attendance areas would, or currently are being pulled out to go to GEO. And if we restructured today, those students, what it would look like in those attendance areas being pulled out due to their desire to go to GEO. Did you want to, Mike, talk about what those numbers would look like for here for South and the overutilization of it?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, the reason we felt that this was important because the previous two slides talk about utilization and what happens specifically at South if there are more kids and not enough space, right? What we don't know is what impact our GEO learners are going to have on those numbers, right? So if there are students out there that want to remain in GEO, the numbers that we just presented to you would decrease and potentially real classroom space may not be a true challenge because students are in the GEO learning program. So those are some variables that we're trying to truly understand, but we wanted to present that as well because if that were the case and there was no need either to build additional classrooms, or even if you did, you would then be operating pretty darn close to 100% of that space, which again just improves that overall efficiency. I hope that made sense. I hope I didn't lose anyone with that. The GEO students are going to be a factor in subsequent years somehow, and we just don't know how that's going to play out specifically right
Ms.
now.
Bergen, if I may. We had this conversation wanting really to know, and you know with GEO, it's been that parents have enrolled them and they pulled them out. We started about 4,000, then we got down to the 2,500. So one of the things that we did do is I had Dr. Peterson and Carvalho do another survey to our GEO parents and just ask them, should the pandemic end or when the pandemic does end, will you return back to brick and mortar? And Dr. Peterson and Carvalho, if you'll share that data, please.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. We had about a 56% return rate on the survey, and it was a pretty quick turnaround so far with that data. And with the 56% return rate, 56% of them said that they would return back to in-person. 44% would remain in GEO for the 2021-2022 school year, which if you take that number and go by the 2046 number, it's somewhere around 900. 900 students would stay in GEO, while the other 1,100 or so would go back to in-person.
So if I may, Dr. Pearson and Carvalho, so with that, we will come back in January and we will have a pretty, very simplistic survey for GEO parents that will probably be self-populated, that we need to get 100% return rate back. We need to know, for staffing purposes, forget boundary in this conversation. If everything was, we didn't have to worry about declining enrollment, we were just going to determine whether we were going to continue GEO or not, we would need parents to let us know so that Ms. Valdez could begin that staffing process, because we begin that right after the first of the year. So they will have to tell us, yes, I'm returning, yes or no, and they'll have to register. And at some point, we will have very specific directions, but at some point when they do not register, it will be an automatic default to brick and mortar. We can't continue not to have the other 54% not respond, because we can't build classrooms and staffing models not knowing where the other 1,000 are going to go. So they'll have to make that decision. And if they will give them ample time to do that. If they fail to make that decision, we'll build GEO based on capacity, and they'll have to go on a waiting list to determine, because we can't go back and forth with the staffing like we did this year. It's impossible to do.
So, Madam President, members of the board, so to the information that you just heard from the superintendent and Dr. Peterson and Corvalla, you apply that logic here to this slide up here. And so again, there may not be a need to actually truly build. Again, there are all these variables. So we just wanted to provide you that information, because the information is going to be helpful as we navigate this process, not only this, but I think as the superintendent said, just as staffing in general. And so for those reasons, we felt it was valuable information that you had before you. And I'll turn it over back to Nick.
Thank you. Madam President, members of the board, this last slide, that is just a basic reference to the assigned school to the assigned grids.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagada-Jones, this is just, we're talking about attendance areas, the number of students. When we look at building the budget, and I think if you recall, the board update on Friday just kind of gave you, I think, even historically, I've given you how the budget for this year was built. And so this is something that I've always referenced, I think, in more recent times. I always refer back to 2001, the number of schools that we had, which were 15 at that time. And so I think, as the superintendent pointed out, when I heard Rick mentioned that our enrollment is about where it was in the 95-96 school year, I mean, I think it's fair to say that my jaw dropped in that conversation this morning. And so the question became, well, how many schools did we have then? And so we quickly just did the research, and I think, as the superintendent pointed out earlier, we had 13. And so what I want to get to and hopefully communicate to you is, currently, where it says current, it's 8,125. There are various factors, the pandemic, all those reasons. In the most simplest way, if you just take the 100th day, which was in 2019, that 11,335, and you take the difference to 8,125, I think I had that in the report on Friday. I think it was like a 25% decline or something, right? But then let's just say that there was no pandemic and that number didn't decrease to the extent that it has. In 2029, we're going to have, based on the current information that's been made available, 9,005 kids from a funding level perspective, of course, right? That number is less than what it was in 95, 96 by, I believe, about 1,200.
Thank you, Mr. Berrigan. I want to look at what we believe the next steps are, and then we want to open this study session up for discussion with you, with the governing board, to give us direction. We believe that looking at this, we know what we believe, we've shared with you what the boundary makes sense to do, and also helps us get to efficiency with our buildings. And so we would have to do a site analysis, and that just means looking at each school and making sure if there's anything that needed to be done, we would be able to get that done. For example, we talked about, let's just use South. If there has to be any remodel done, then what does that look like, and what's the timeline for that? Although I would like to say that, as Mr. Berrigan did, I think that is highly unlikely. Next would be transportation analysis. You know, we have everybody, and Rick and Nick did a beautiful job getting all these little dots in the right grid, but we need to run transportation to see what that looks like and how efficient that is as well. Again, staffing model, and I know Dr. Peterson and Carvalho talked about a K-8 model, but we are not talking just K-8. We talk about a staffing model. What does, if it's the K-8, what does that mean as far as the entire, not just teaching staff, administrative staff, but our support staff? What does that look like? And when we go back and we look at some of the schools, at least 6 years ago, I believe, or a little bit longer, I know we're looking at schools sitting at 1,000 to 1,200. Our schools, some of our schools were sitting at that, so that's why they were built for that. So, and as you've heard us say, at least for the last several years, is that although we've had a decline in enrollment, we never changed our staffing model. We kept 2 administrators, we kept 2 achievement advisors, and we kept 3 office staff until about 2 years ago, I believe, or 3 years ago. We started looking at those inefficiencies and started to reduce that. So that's what we mean by a staffing model. What does a very efficient K-8 school look like, and what are the support staff as well as teaching staff and administrative staff need? So that's what we mean by a staffing model. Next would be the phased approach timeline to possible school closure and or school repurposing. We've always talked about what happens to those schools should there be a school closure. Is there a school repurposing? Because we are, I think Mr. Brammer has told us that several times as well, and we've heard that when we talked about the sale of land, is that you risk charter schools coming in. So what would we do with those buildings? So we would want to share some thoughts on that. As you saw back in one of our goals, and we've talked about that for several years, we really want to have that service of care. I think coming out of the pandemic, now more than ever, we will need to have wraparound services for our students and families with the social emotional piece. We have begun that for the last 2 years under the leadership of Dr. Lafitte, where we have counseling services right there on our premises, and we're seeing now coming out of this and through this pandemic that we need that now more than ever. So all these services that we provide, such as the food bank and counseling services, we'd really like to have a medical clinic, all that. That's going to be critical for us. And so those are just examples of repurposing. And then the next piece, obviously, which is the most important piece, is a comprehensive staff and community communication plan. What does this look like? Okay, so in our eyes, after we've looked at all the different reiterations and what it could be based on boundaries and efficiencies, where do we go from here? So at this time, I'm going to let you ask any questions that you have and give us directions on next steps.
I noticed in one of the reports on the pros and cons of middle school that something that was very important was parent input. And so do you have plans for bringing parents in on the, let them voice their opinions?
So with the way that when you look at how we did the attendance is based off a K-8. So the option isn't really, do we say, are we going to maintain a K-3 or a 4-8, but move to a K-8 because that's what the boundaries have done. They've created the K-8. The conversations with the parents is, what is it that they may, for our parents that are currently in a K-3 or 4-8 setting, what is it that their concerns are that would help them understand the transition to K-8 to be very smooth. And so that does take place naturally because you're in a K-3, 4-8. But we do know when I first came on board the first time, there was conversations that some of our K-3 students were not going to our 4-8s. So we began to look at that data, and that wasn't really true. Our K-3 third grade did transition into our fourth grades. There were some exceptions, but the majority of our kids we didn't lose when they transitioned. But again, it's those first-time parents that have a K1, 2, 3, and that's all they've known in that setting. And what does it mean to go to a 4-8 setting? So yes, that's when the parent input comes in, is how can we help you with those transitions? And what is it that you see that we need to do to better improve a K-8 model? I think one of the things that Dr. Peterson and Carvalho said was, parents, I would be also concerned as a parent, how are you going to help my 8th grader transition into high school? And then what does that look like? And do we start changing what 7th and 8th grade look like for our students? And we've not really done that. A lot of times you still can't, everybody in our, as you know, in our K-8 setting gets the same electives. And, is that something during that model that we want to consider changing? I believe that's where some of that parent input is, really asking them, what would you like to see in a K-8 model? Not, do you want a yes or no? Because I think the data's pretty strong. It needs to be a K-8, and then the way the boundaries are done and our efficiencies would be a K-8. But what is it that is working for you, and what is it that's not working for you that you'd like to see the changes? And then absolutely that would be coming from the parents. Other questions?
Can I add something onto that topic that you're just speaking on?
Yes, Ms. Smith.
I just want to share my experience. Sorry, it was echoing for me. When I was, a new mom, and I went to the K model, and I walked in, and I was really concerned about, where I wanted my first kindergartner to attend. It was almost scary to me to see these big, middle schoolers in the school, and I felt that the school did a really good job, and this is something that we already experienced with already having K-8 schools. But after seeing the 8th graders actually have time in my kindergartner's class and seeing the relationship that they had as they walked through the campuses, I learned as a parent that this really is a good community, approach, having these K-8s. And I think, when you say that you're going to, get your parental input, you also are going to need to, explain, the benefits of, having the K-8 model as far as the community. And, I just think that, I read that study also, that, I don't know who said it, whatever board member said it before about, getting the parental input, it said about, dress codes and everything else in there. So, yeah, so definitely that is something that, I know that you will do, and that is, a priority for me as we go forth.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Other questions we have?
I'm going to weigh in just a little bit. One of the things when my son was in 6th grade, and at the time, we did have middle schools. And in speaking to his teachers, I think it was important as a parent that what they expressed to me was, why don't you keep him at the K-8? Because they felt at that time it was more of a nurturing culture. And there were things that my son was going through. And they said, if you send him to the middle school, he may get lost in the shuffle. And in one of the articles that I read, which was interesting because I had never heard that, where they're kind of saying, well, once you go to middle school, it's a culture of hands-off. And that's kind of what I heard from his teachers back then. So I am excited about the keeping everything K-8. I grew up in a K-8, and so I didn't know anything different. But I do feel that it's important to keep our kids together in a nurturing situation. And I guess I understand the whole transition to 8th grade to high school. And if I'm correct, please correct me if I'm wrong, our 7th and 8th graders are switching classes for math or English or for certain things.
Yes.
And so I think that is a good start for a transition to high school. That's how I experienced it. But I really feel that keeping the K-8 is really important. And being the oldest of 4 kids of growing up myself, it's nice to kind of keep the families together as long as you can as well. So I like this idea.
Thank you, President Pimentel. Other questions that we can answer? Ms. Bartels.
I just wanted to clarify, because when you talked about the numbers at Bicentennial, they're both south or north, they were like in the 1,000 range. Is it 1,000 plus students total for between those two schools, or is it 1,000 at each of those schools right now?
No, it takes, when you're looking at it, it takes those interns north and south into a K-8, okay?
But it's just one campus, that would
one
be?
campus,
Okay.
yes, I'm sorry, one campus. Now, where it's different is Jack Menzendick, it turns Jack into a K-8, Menzendick into a K-8.
Okay.
It takes Garden and Challenger and turns Challenger into a K-8, okay?
So Challenger would then become the K-8 for that square mile?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so, any other questions? So, okay, so let me just, I have some questions. I think this is a lot of information. I think we know what next steps we believe are. We really need to do the site analysis and determine, is this doable? We need to look at transportation. That is going to take us a while to do that. That's why we're proposing January 28th study session again, because we've got to have time to run those routes to see and make any adjustments that we have to make. The staffing models, we have to look at what we've had in the past as well as what research says on staffing models in those configurations. Also, we need to look at setting what is that phased timeline to be able to do this. With that in mind, we are declining enrollment. This has to be addressed. We know that we have to move forward with this. And then bring back a comprehensive community plan, and that's where we begin those conversations with our staff members, all staff members and community about moving into this direction and what does that mean. I do want to say that this is the study session. This is the first that you've seen it. It's the, as of this afternoon, when we did a run through it this morning to make sure we had looked at everything, that we hadn't missed anything, and then we looked again this afternoon. No one else has seen this. Those people that are watching it and saw the shifts, I'm sure they would be extremely nervous about that. And what does that mean? I want to say to all of our staff members and our community members, we are in planning stages right now. We will be very transparent about what we do and what we share. We will have a communication out to what has occurred at this governing board meeting, what the next steps are. We will open up on our website beginning in January frequently asked questions, and we will post those questions for people. I don't want people to think, oh my goodness, there's 5 schools named on there and now I don't have a job. I think that's premature right now. We're looking at if this is the direction in which we need to go, which my understanding from I'm listening to you, it's the direction we need to go, and we know we need to do that to be financially solvent as well. then we need to bring that back to you on the 28th. We need to have staff and community be able to process that, answer their questions for us, so that when we have that discussion on the 28th, we can do that. I would, well, hope is not a strategy, I'm going to say that, okay? But I would hope by then we would be able to start to have in person, so that we can have our community come to ask questions. If not, we will think of how we can get to them so that we can be there with them. But meanwhile, it's first and foremost the safety and health of our community and staff. But we will have open discussions with them and share that information. But I don't want people to be nervous about, oh my gosh, my school is closing, and because there's no action being taken, and that, as we said, we talked about closures and repurposing, and I'm not going to have a position. I think that, is it likely that there could be positions gone? Absolutely. I'm not going to tell you there isn't. We know that. But we also need to bring back, and HR has a whole lot of work to do right now, because we need to see what staffing models look like, but also bring back what are some of those, for example, with staffing with teachers. We have a teacher shortage. It's probably highly unlikely that we're going to have a teacher shortage because we will have enough teachers for that. Classified staff, there's a turnover, so it could be very likely that we may break even with turnover. With your administration, we have turnover as well, but also when we talk about repurposing, what does that mean as well? So I don't want people to go in a panic. I try to be as transparent as possible. We don't want to not share this information, but the first piece of information had to be to the governing board. And so now that that's been shared, we will make sure that communication goes out so every staff member understands it and knows what the next steps are, and then we'll start to share that. It will also go out to our community as well, and we'll share that, and we will bring back to you on the 28th these 5 next steps in detail. They will have a discussion. It will give you time to digest everything, and then we'll determine exactly which direction we are going from then.
Can I add something real quick?
Yes.
And this just kind of goes back to when I served on the attendance boundary committee years ago. But one of the other parents that was on that committee at the time had asked the question, how many students do you need on a campus for it to be cost efficient?
Right.
And we have to be cost efficient. There is no getting around it. And even at that time, it was, the number that was thrown to us was 750 kids per campus. And we're no longer hitting that mark. And unfortunately, I also don't want to be sitting on a board that takes a district into receivership either with the state, because then none of us here at this table right now will have a say in anything that the state does.
Absolutely. I think and also as we talk about, and you've heard Mr. Berrigan say, as we talk about funding and capital funding, and we still need to build new schools. And we are very full aware that Schools Facility Board is not going to build new schools if we are not being efficient in what we're doing. They're not. So we need to do that. So we will bring back that plan. I think for us, we always knew that, we've known for a long time, obviously decade, you've heard it, that there's been a decline in enrollment. But when Mr. Brema told us this morning that back to 1995-96, I was thinking about what I was doing in 1995-96, and I was carrying my child at that time. That's a long time ago, and to think that our enrollment has declined that much, that was just a rude awakening for all of us at the table. Not that we've not, Mr. Berrigan brings enrollment to us every week, and that's shared with you in board updates, but that just seems, wow, 1995, when we've made no adjustments. And as you can see, I know there will be concerns about we may be making decisions prematurely because there's a pandemic. Regardless, as Mr. Brema said, there is a pandemic. Who comes back, who doesn't come back, that is the unknown, but the bottom line, it doesn't change the ending of our story. It's declining enrollment, so that's where it is. Any other questions I can answer at this time? This is the
I
most,
have something
yes, Ms.
that I
Smith.
want to bring up. On the 28th, you said that we should have another study session, and that you're talking January, was correct? Or
Yes, Ms. Smith, January 28th. It will take us that long to do a transportation analysis alone. Yes.
2021.
Okay.
2021, I'm sorry.
Oh.
January 28, 2021.
Okay, and then my question for you is, the things, the proposals are before us and we're seeing them. I just want you to know that, it says there are 4 people watching on YouTube, and I'm one of them. And, so there aren't very many people that are aware of what's going on. And so, getting that communication out is definitely, real important. But as a board, I want to make sure that we're, in the legal time frame to be able to make our closures and do what we need to do. And I feel that should also, be communicated, to, the staff and the community about in your communication about, what the legal time frames are so that they know what's going on.
Absolutely, Ms. Smith. We will work on a communication, and that communication will go out directly to them no later than Monday, so that they know. And then we also want to, our communications director will create, similar to what Dr. Lafitte did with the COVID, a website, link and all that has that information, and we will do that. I just want to say something. Mr. Clark is sitting in the back. How many people do you show watching?
Currently there's 56 concurrent users, 129 people have.
So 129 people have been in and out, 56 are currently. Okay. Well, yeah, so it's interesting, but I just wanted to I was a little alarmed by there was only 4 because I have more than 4 administrators that should be watching. And I know my administrators are watching. And I do want to say to them, please don't go into a panic mode. We will, as I told them today, I shared with them that we would be discussing the study session. I didn't share anything other than, please don't go in a panic mode. We will do this. We'll stand side by side as leaders, and we will get through this. But that's easier said than done. I understand that. This is probably one of the most difficult board meetings I've had to have, study session. As I said before, pandemic looks pretty easy right now as compared to closing schools or looking at repurposing schools. That's never easy to do, but I know as a superintendent, I have a responsibility as a superintendent to make sure that this district is financially solvent. I will not be a superintendent that is taken over by the state because I couldn't manage money. So extremely, extremely difficult. But I do want to say that we value our employees, and we will make sure that they are aware of everything that is happening, as well as our community. So again, thank you.
I have another question for you. When I was watching the slides of the new proposed boundaries, it says repurpose on a lot of the school. And I just think that needs to be explained better, like what that means. Because I didn't really understand what was going on in all the boundary things. So, and then I would also like information about how many children are going to be affected by what we're proposing. If that can just come to us at the 28th.
Yes, absolutely. We can share that data as well. And then also, and a lot of those questions, for example, when we looked at some of those things, it's how many children currently, for example, there were scenarios with Sunset Vista. We'll use that as an example. A lot of Sunset Vista kids already are bused. We also had, on the grid, there were some of those anomalies, and that's why we try to get all of those dots in the right grids, and we can address those. We also tried to do our best. I know Nick and Rick tried to do their best of, I'm looking at school A, but I go to school B. Sometimes that just happens, but we tried to address those. You also could see where we discussed a little bit at the last study session that perhaps we created the Sunset Vista issue because we thought we were going to build Unit 18. And then there's a whole Manistee Ranch history. And so some of those anomalies, we didn't know why. We had a little bit of history on them, but we tried to create that so it made sense. And I think when you asked us last time to, let's just blow up the boundaries, I think is a term I use, and do it correctly, that is what, we did. We looked at it and thought, if we're going to do this, let's just do it once. And hopefully, when we go to do the next part of it on the transportation analysis and that we are truly being and operating more efficiently than we have in the last decade. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further comments or questions? At this time, we will recess until our board meeting begins at 5:30. Do we have a motion to recess?
I'll move to recess.
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are officially recessed.
That's a lot of information.
Hello.
Hello.
Just need somebody on the microphone to say
Hello.
Hello.
Can I hear me?
I can hear me.
Good evening and welcome back. We will now make a motion to return from recess to our regular board meeting. Do we have a motion to return?
I'll move to reconvene the meeting.
Thank you. There was a motion to return by Board Member Bartels. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 And we are returned. We are at item 3, oath of office. At this time, we being Board Member Martinez, Board Member Wilson, and myself, we will be sworn in by Board Member Bartels. Please rise.
Everybody have their mics on?
Yes.
All right. The only thing is you got to hold it with the left hand. You need to raise your right hand.
See, it made me think about which hand's my right hand?
Okay. Repeat after me. In the state of Arizona, county of Maricopa, I state your name, do solemnly swear.
In the state of Arizona, the county of Maricopa, I, Mary Ann Wilson, do solemnly swear
That I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona.
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and
defend them against
all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of the office of Glendale Elementary School District Number 40, Governing Board Member, according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
That I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of office of Glendale Elementary School District Number 40, Governing Board Member, according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for waiting. We are at item number 4, call to the public. Do we have any calls to the public?
Good evening, Madam President. No, we do not.
Thank you. No calls to the public. We will move on to item 5, consent agenda. Are there any items board members would like pulled? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. We are now at item 6, reports and information.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, at this time, we'd like to present the latest GSD health benchmarks update from Dr. Louis Lafitte.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. So as with our normal biweekly posting of these metrics for you for the board or presentation, if you'll notice, we've seen a slight decrease in the overall metrics for the district, and our cases per 100,000, it went down by about 10. But we did still see an increase in percent positivity. Where you'll start to see the changes for us, actually it'll be on the slide after this one, but as a district we saw a similar, this is those same numbers, where we saw the decrease in cases per 100,000 and percent positivity, we saw an increase, getting us little over 19%, closer to that 20%. If you look at our surrounding districts, they're all in that similar range, with Cartwright at about 25.92% positivity. The numbers for us, though, that really are probably the most alarming when we start to look at it are the increases when we look by zip code. Traditionally, and I'll start at the bottom, our numbers over the past few weeks and months in 85303 typically had been our lower numbers. But if you look at those numbers and their movement, or 85303 had typically been our highest number, it actually decreased significantly in those areas. So it went from 393 to 266. in the cases per 100,000 and percent positivity decreased. But where we saw the major increase were in 85301 and 85302. Where 85302 had typically been the lowest, it now, if you look at those numbers, it's significantly higher than the other two zip codes. And so that one actually surpassed 400 cases per 100,000. And the percent positivity is at almost 20% at 19.86. And then our 85301 zip code, which is the zip code we're sitting in now, excuse my voice a little bit, it has increased to 348 cases per 100,000, and we saw an increase in percent positivity to 21. So when we look at these numbers and we look at the red, for us to begin to get anywhere close to, and maybe I'll leave this for Superintendent, for us to get anywhere close to the point of reopening, our numbers have to decrease significantly because we have to see within several of those areas, those numbers have to move to a green area. So in cases per 100,000, that's going to have to decrease to 10 or less. Percent positivity would have to decrease to 5 or less, and COVID-like illness would have to decrease as well. And so those are the areas that we'd have to see decreases in order for us as a district to begin to consider moving back to in-person or even hybrid at this point. On our daily cases, and this is where it's really important to look at, so for those, kind of for that interpretation that I just made, when you look at the lower numbers here at the bottom half in December, we noticed that our total cases, we saw increases by day in the 100, 200 range. Those numbers haven't even been calculated into our numbers yet because the numbers that we get from the county are 2 to 3 weeks behind. And so that means those numbers that you're seeing today, there's a probability that those numbers will increase. Any questions?
So with that, it would be on December 23rd, we would know whether or not we saw a significant decrease in cases and would consider opening on January 4th. It's highly unlikely, but on Monday, December 28th, we will do a family communication and staff communication stating whether we'll be open or not. January 4th, in the event that we were open, that is only a staff day anyway. Students, it was not a calendar school day for students, but it is highly unlikely, but we will do official communication once those final numbers are in on that 23rd.
Are there any questions or comments? We are on item 6B, revised regulation.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, this is just the regulation for the staff dress code to be for your information, if there's any questions. And we'll make sure this is communicated out to staff. You've already approved policy, we just didn't bring the regulation. And as you recall, well, it seems like a long time, so maybe we don't recall, when we looked at the dress code policy, that was done by committee work. We had administrators and teachers part of the dress code committee, and parents reviewed that as well when we were back with our parent meetings and shared that information with them. And so this was the result of that committee work.
Any questions or comments about this regulation? Okay, moving on to item 7, action items.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, it's recommended the governing board approve the second reading and adoption of proposed revisions to policy GCL professional staff schedules and calendars and GDK support staff schedules and calendars as presented. Ms. Valdez could answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions or revisions or comments on this? Do we have a motion to adopt item 7A, policy revision, second reading?
I'll make a motion to adopt the two policies as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. We are on item 7B, resolution for sale of bonds.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, at this time I'll turn it over to Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, there's a resolution before you to seek approval to begin the process of selling bonds. We do have here today Jim Giel, bond counsel with Gus Rosenfeld, Bill Davis, who's our financial advisor with Piper Sandler, could not make it. He was scheduled to be here, but there was a situation that surfaced and he could not be here. He would be available by phone should you have any specific questions. But our intent is to sell an additional $15 million. I believe the last time we sold bonds, it was $9 million. The $15 million is scheduled to address, per the pamphlet, per what we told voters back in November of 2018, it's to continue the work that we've started. And frankly, decisions next month will probably determine a little bit about what that $15 million really looks like. Obviously, we had some ideas prior to this whole conversation, but we want to make sure that we have the funds available to address whatever might be coming in the next couple of months. So we might fine-tune that here. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have related to the $15 million bond sale that we're hoping to close on Thursday, February 18th would be kind of that long-term, or what would be happening in the next couple of weeks, with the hope that, again, we close on Thursday, February 18th.
Thank you. Are there any comments?
I have a question. Based on our study session earlier and the possibility, and that is the keyword possibility, that we're reducing the number of campuses that we have students at. Will any of those projects at these bonds dollars, will we be focusing those schools first and then do other projects that might have been slotted with that money?
Madam President, members of the board, obviously that's something that we want to be mindful of. And so the short answer is we want to have money to address whatever decisions are being made to address the needs of the district. And so that could potentially include some of those conversations that we just had and the implications or the implementation of those decisions between now and, frankly, probably the next 24 months.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions?
I have a question. Mr. Barragan said fine-tuning. What does that mean exactly?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, Member Smith, I think it's specifically related to Mrs. Bartel's question, was as the decisions that are going to be made over the next 4 to 6 weeks, how will those decisions impact the $15 million? Obviously, if you would have asked me a year ago what we're doing, I could have specifically told you what we're going to do. But also, the way that we wrote the pamphlet and what we told our voters was there might be a need to add additional new construction to existing facilities and or potentially replacement schools. So if there is a need based on information to add additional classrooms, if you will, at a particular campus, we would move in that direction, again, in accordance to the decisions that are being made, as well as what's in that bond pamphlet. So what I'm trying to say is we want to be somewhat flexible based on the decisions that have to occur over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Are there any other questions, Mrs. Smith?
I'm just looking over the certificates and just making sure that everything from what Mr. Barragan was saying and that everything would be okay. Well, I don't think I have any questions.
Thank you.
So at this time, it's recommended the governing board consider and, if deemed advisable, approve the adoption of resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of school improvement bonds of the district and adoption of certain post-issuance continuing disclosure procedures and issuance and post-issuance tax compliance procedures.
Do we have a motion to adopt this resolution for the sale of bonds?
I'll move to adopt the resolution for the sale of bonds.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. We are at item 7C, employment of coordinator for Title IX. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, it is recommended the governing board approve the employment of Frances DeWent as a coordinator for the Title IX position.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this resume? Person?
I was impressed with her resume. It was quite very impressive.
I'm going to pipe in here. I was also very impressed. This is quite a resume. Anybody else have any other questions or comments? Do we have a motion to approve item 7C, employment of coordinator for Title VII?
Title IX.
Title IX, I'm sorry.
We're not creating a new position.
No, Title IX, I apologize.
I make a motion to approve the hiring of Frances DeWint for the coordinator of Title IX.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Congratulations to Ms. DeWint.
Yeah, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Moving on to item 8, discussion items 8A, governing board self-evaluation. At this time, the governing board will conduct its annual self-evaluation pursuant to board policy BAA, evaluation of the school board self-evaluation, board self-evaluation. We have in front of us a compilation of the self-evaluation that we did, that we all filled out. And I believe it's prudent that we go through it one by one to see if there's anything that needs to be discussed. So we are on, does everyone have it in front of them? A, board relationship with the superintendent. We all seem to be in the satisfactory zone there. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss there? Moving on. We will go to, that's A1. A2, the board clearly interprets its position on controversial matters pertaining to the district, thereby enabling the superintendent to properly carry out the wishes of the board. I was the only one that put needs improvement, and I think because I have been guilty of not being clear with what I want from the superintendent sometimes, and so I need to verbalize to her sometimes exactly what I mean and what I want. So I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on that. Everyone else seemed to be okay.
Well, I think on this one, you want to also put it in the context of as a board.
As a board.
So my suggestion would be, okay, so you want to be more clear when you're speaking more at the board table, because that may change how we view it as a board in a whole.
True. And I know sometimes I tend to be scatterbrained. So, and I'm not saying this about anybody else. I'm saying this completely about me. So I believe that sometimes I need to be the one to be more clear with what I'm stating. So that's why I said needs improvement. So I suppose that's me, not the board. It seems that we are all clear on item A3. The board disregards personalities and considers the recommendations of the superintendent on an unbiased and objective manner. I'm just going to keep going until someone has a question. Item 4, the board communicates views of personnel effectiveness, including views related to the superintendent, in a confident and professional manner. We all scored satisfactory on that. Item B, board relationship with the community. Number 1, the board recognizes that the citizens have entrusted them with the educational development of the children and youth of this community. We all voted satisfactory with that, all the way down. Number 2, the board recognizes that the community expects their first and greatest concern to be in the best interest of each and every one of the young people without distinction as to who they are or what their background may be. We all voted satisfactory in that as well. Number 3, the board enacts policies supporting the efforts of the administration in helping the people of this community to have the facts about their schools to the end that they will readily provide the finest possible school program, school staff, and school facilities. We have 1 needs improvement and 4 satisfactory.
And mine, while we have gotten better at actually making sure that our policies are up to date, I think we could do a better job as an organization to try to make sure that we're not creating some unintended consequences, because we're getting an ASBA recommendation for a policy update, and sometimes we do need to look a little closer at it, make sure we're not creating inequities via our policies.
Is there any other discussion on that? Anybody have any questions for Mrs. Bartels?
I was confused on what you said. What do you mean inequities?
I think I would agree with you, Ms. Bartels, just because we've seen policies come across from ASBA and instead of kind of rubber stamping them, there's some things that seem like they don't really apply, and we've kind of run into that a couple times, and I would support the needs improvement, that we don't just need to accept everything from ASBA just as, out of rubber stamping. So.
They're meeting a legal requirement to make sure that, at the minimum, this is, the threshold to meet statutory requirements. But there are sometimes, that a policy, such as your dress code, we need to look at that. Are we creating inequities within our school, or, disparagement with our students because of, if something as simple as a dress code in our district?
Okay. Any other questions? Moving on, we are on item C, board relationships between members during meetings. Number 1, individual members of the board treat other members of the board and professional staff with respect during board meetings. We all said that was satisfactory. Number 2, differences of opinion influencing board member votes are based on the issues at hand and not on a personality basis. We all voted satisfactory on that as well. Number 3, all members of the board conduct themselves in such a manner as to emphasize that individual board members have authority only when convened in a legally conducted board meeting with at least a quorum present. We do have 1 needs improvement. Would anyone like to discuss this needs improvement?
Well, mine was an S-, technically.
And you had a comment, yes.
Yeah. So we just have to be very, very clear in our role. No matter what, people always look at us as being board members, but when we're speaking on something as an individual citizen, we need to state that we're, an individual citizen. Because if we have not given authority to anyone to state a position on something, then none of us should do that.
Okay. Anybody else?
I don't know if I agree with that. And I come from the point of view that once you are an elected official, you will always be an elected official, whether you are speaking in your personal life on your personal Facebook or you're doing it in a board meeting. You may not have the authority behind it, just chatting out on your Facebook or signing on to letters, but you are still an elected official. And as part of that elected official, as part of the GESD board, I think you can't separate the two. And you have to, there's a fine line, between what you may think is appropriate or not, but when it comes down to it, on a personal level, you have the right to make those decisions. Yeah, there may not be any authority to it because we're school board members, and really our authority lies in being in a meeting and making a decision as a group of people. But you still retain that right to be able to make those comments or those decisions, whether they're to your benefit or detriment.
Yep. Well, I guess I'm going to look at it from ASBA training point of view. So you're absolutely right. I do have an opinion, and I can speak to that on any issue out there. You know, the coronavirus was a perfect example of it. You know, that caused a lot of angst throughout the state. But if I speak to it that I think the state should do A, B, and C and not pin it directly on the districts, then I need to make it clear that that's my sentiment, because I may be inadvertently jeopardizing what the district is also trying to do if I am putting the district's name on it.
I think what Board Member Martinez is stating is you do have that opinion, but you're always going to be viewed as a board member. I can use myself. I'm always going to be viewed as a superintendent, even if it's 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I mean, that's just the role we live and we play in. So I think that's really the point made.
I'm going to agree with Mr. Martinez. As elected officials, we are asked at times to endorse people or to sign on to a letter because there is strength in unity. And if I sign and let's say that Mrs. Wilson signs and Mrs. Bartell signs, then there's definitely a problem because there's 3 of us signing, and that's a quorum. But if I sign as a person who believes in using red sweaters instead of green sweaters, I like red sweaters. So
I don't see where we've had a problem with that, though. I don't see anybody, speaking to somebody and saying that the board feels this way or the board, when we haven't even discussed it. So I just haven't seen a problem with that in this past year. Have we? Have we had a problem?
Well, the very thing that you described, though, easily could have happened because there wasn't exactly a way to know that other people had already signed it, because the same thing went around via different routes. Because I know I got emails on stuff to sign. And, it's one thing to put Brenda Bartels as a citizen, as a board member, I don't have any objection to. But as soon as you stick the district's name on it, when we've not had that collective conversation, that's when I'm just a little concerned.
I respect your concern.
Thank you.
Is there any other comment on this specific topic? Okay, moving on. Item D, board relationships with staff and personnel. Number 1, the board requires a superintendent to recommend personnel for their consideration and consistently adheres to this procedure. We all voted satisfactory. Number 2, the board members make every effort to become acquainted with the personnel of the district. There are 2 that are needs improvement and 3 that are satisfactory. There's a comment, without appropriately visiting sites and events, how can we? And that is true. It's difficult to do that at this time. Is there any other comments?
No, I'm just going to play my rookie card on this one. So I said no for a couple of reasons. One, there's absolutely no way we could really do this safely now. And 2, I have to wonder really about the appropriateness of just board members just popping up at school sites and hanging out and like, hey, let's get to know each other. I would rather not do that, and I'd rather not the expectation be that I do that. As within the district office, I'm introduced and I talk to people as appropriate for whatever needs to happen, but I don't feel it's appropriate for me to just go out with the intent of hanging out with everyone in the district. Not that they're all not great people. Don't get me wrong. I just don't want to put any undue pressure on somebody like, oh, so-and-so is here. It's like, no, don't worry about it. I'm just here for Peter Piper Pizza.
And usually throughout the year, there's a lot of opportunity for us to,
A lot of volunteering.
to visit.
A lot of opportunity.
It's just that this year it's not happening. Any other comments on this? Okay, moving on. Number 3, the board members' personal friendships with district personnel are maintained without allowing them to affect overall board decisions and/or policies. We all said that was satisfactory. E, board relationship to the instructional program. Number 1, The board makes an effort to keep informed about instructional program by providing for periodic reports as deemed necessary by periodic visitation in the schools. We were all over the place on this one. So does anyone want to start this conversation off?
Well, mine's the first one typed in. So, I know COVID aside, when you read this, the periodic visitations of schools, I think we could do, better once normalcy comes back a little bit, being, made aware of events, invitations ahead of time so that we can actually go to them to see that, we know there are different programs going on in our school, but I think we as a board can also do a better job of, getting those updates a little bit, kind of showcasing a little bit, somehow those different programs.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this? No further comment. We will be moving on to number 2. The board attempts to gain information from the community pertaining to instructional program needs. Again, we are all over the board on this one. Who would like to start on this one? Anyone who said A, needs improvement or unsatisfactory?
Oh, I'll go. I know that we do survey our community, but I don't know just how relevant those questions are or how we get feedback from those parents that may struggle to participate. Also, I'd like to know, because as far as I know, we don't get this district-wide, but are we hearing from the student voice when, are we doing a survey that we can actually capture from our kids? Our kids know what things work and what things don't.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, moving on. Number 3, the board maintains policies necessary to enable the educational staff to develop the educational program required to meet the needs of the community. We have 4 satisfactories and 1 unsatisfactory.
Well, mine just connects to what I had already said earlier about the policies, looking at them better to make sure we're not creating unintended consequences of inequity.
Okay. Any other comments on this item? Moving along to F, board relationship to the financial management of schools. 1, the board establishes the policies and provides the necessary resources to properly manage the finances of the district. We all said satisfactory. Number 2, the board requires the proper accountability for the expenditure of funds in the district. We have 3 satisfactories and 1 needs improvement. Would anyone like to discuss this?
My comments are there. I think as a board, we need to be more specific, in our direction that the funds should go, and we should make sure that they're aligned with our strategic plan and the district goals. So, and that'll be the same for the next one also.
Is there any further comment on this? Thank you. That is noted. Number 3, the board provides justified funding to maintain a high-quality education program in this district. We have a couple satisfactory and a couple needs improvement.
Yep. My comment to this, I think we can do a better job in how we present this information, not only to the board, but also to our citizens. We meet the legal requirements, but most people outside of a school district have absolutely no idea how those documents look and how it relates to even something as simple as showing the comparison of where funding used to be and where funding is just based on our loss of students. Our community doesn't see that as easily. But also it'd be better to show if our goal is over here, to show that we're directing funds that way. But we just need to do it, I think, in a more simplistic way to be more easily understood.
Okay. And there was another comment, same reasoning as the other one. So it's basically the saying that we should be more specific with funding. Are there any other comments?
I would just like to comment about being more specific. I really don't want to get into the point where we as board members are kind of getting into the weeds of some of the decisions that are having to be made at the district by honestly people that spend their lives working with these kind of numbers and to making these kind of decisions. And I don't want us to get into the role of second guessing some decisions that are made for, essentially people that we've helped hire and we've helped bring into the district to help us succeed. And then kind of, just piggyback on everything that they do. I don't want to be that specific, and that's my only comment.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on that, and I would say probably that's probably one of the biggest things we need to work on as a board is making sure we're not getting into the weeds too much, because I think we do a little bit of that. We go a little too far that way sometimes, and maybe we need to. Take a look at what our role really is, again, and go over that. That might help if we do that periodically.
I've said in the past that the reason we hire our superintendent is to do a very specific job, and I tend to agree with Board Member Martinez and Mrs. Wilson that we do hire our financial team, as you said, for that very specific knowledge, because I don't have that knowledge, and I rely on them to give us that information to make the decisions. So,
Well, can I just phrase it in a way that maybe would make what I'm saying a little more clear?
Sure.
Okay, think about tax time when you go to a CPA to get your taxes done. I have no idea what that document, the instructions for that are confusing beyond belief. But I know by the end, this is what I paid, this is what my taxable income is, and this is what my refund or my payment out is. That's what I'm saying. We just need to show it a little more easily so that our community knows. Because if I pull out the AFR, I'm just going to, this is the line for this is the line for that. It doesn't make it a much easier, basic way to understand it. I don't think they want to know every single line and where every dollar is going, but they want to know, okay, is this going to my classroom for my kid? Is this,
I think what you're describing and what I'm saying are two different things.
That's why I was like, making sure.
I see what you're saying, where you're saying make it easy to understand.
Yeah.
But I think where I was going, and possibly others, is where we need to be more specific in the direction of funds. I think that's when we hire somebody with this knowledge and certain certifications, they are the ones that are going to be the ones that have that education to do that. So I think what you're saying and what I'm saying are two completely different things.
So what you're saying, Ms. Bartels, is something that you should just ask Mr. Barragan to maybe be a little clearer on when he's presenting, and just a simple question or a simple request. I don't think as a board we are able to do that.
Actually, we as a board can, though. Because if we're supposed to be helping our community understand how our district is doing, that would be one of those ways.
Well, I know, but you don't have to get into specifics, with a community member. It's obvious that we're in a declining enrollment and what the consequences are. But to get into the specifics of an AFR, that's not our...
No, but that's the information,
that
though, that our community accesses when they look at our website.
Well, I think kind of what we've gotten into the difference between understanding what you're doing versus giving direction for what you're doing. And yes, there's the AFR is a complicated piece of paperwork as well as budgets, and there are other sites like you can go to ADE and they have kind of graphical breakdowns of a lot of that stuff as to where the money is going, and maybe that would help us educate the community as to where are these dollars going and what does it actually look like in comparison to other districts. But again, going back to this particular question, I don't want to, there isn't a staff member in this room that I know more about for the job that they are doing at this district. And I've worked with school finance people for over a decade now, and I could not compete. There's not really an instance where I could say I know more than any one of these people in here. And I'd rather keep it that way. Just tell me and help me understand what it is that we're doing and why that we're doing it. I'm okay with that. I'm not going to tell you, no, you need to move this funds from this fund here to pay for this item. I don't want to say I don't care, but I don't want to get into I'm micromanaging what you do. And that's just really specifically to this question that we're kind of on right now. I don't want to wander too much off topic.
Correct. Which actually segues us into number 4. The board keeps the community informed about the financial needs of the district. And I think Mrs. Bartels, that's what you're saying. Make it simple for them to understand that we are letting them know that we're doing the best we can as a district to be financially solvent for their kids and our community as a whole. So there's 3 satisfactories, 2 needs improvement. Do we want to further discuss number 4? I think we kind of got it in 2 and 3.
Yeah, I think we kind of rolled those up there.
Spent a little too much time on that one.
Okay. So we got an overall composite score of 2.79 out of, I'm assuming, 3? Does anybody have anything to discuss in that first section? Okay, moving on to the general statements. At this section, list in order of priority 4 challenges the board faces. I'm not going to read each one of ours. It kind of seems that we're on the same page, all 5 of us. There's a couple things that are listed a couple times. Enrollment, financial solvency, teacher shortage, COVID-19. Does anybody have anything they want to comment on anything in this statement?
I would say if we take anything away from this, we really need to work on the superintendent evaluation. And I think that's something that we need to set aside some time,
Yes.
Maybe over the summer, to really work on that. Because I think that was mentioned in almost every single one of them.
It was mentioned quite a few times.
I think we need to do it ahead of time because I know there are some timelines that if we want to actually get to a point of doing it from start to finish correctly, we need to make sure we have the appropriate dates so that we're ahead of it.
Yes, agreed. Number 2, list any weaknesses you have observed in the operation of the school system. Again, we're kind of consistent here. Teacher retention, lack of communication. I guess we're kind of all over the board on this one. Weakness is declining enrollment. Is there anything specific here anyone wants to discuss or have any questions on it? Anyone's comments here? Hearing none, I'll move on. Number 3, list any significant accomplishments made by the school system during the past year. I think that we are pretty consistent here. I'll read a few of these comments. Implementation of GEO, one-on-one devices, that was mentioned a couple of times. Food service, continuation of services to our community. Giving the superintendent the authority to make decisions as needed, being flexible. This year has definitely needed that, and thank you. I'll read one comment here as well. The board made a correct decision to have the superintendent make the plans regarding COVID-related issues affecting schools. The superintendent with her executive team did a remarkable job preparing for the constant changes. Teachers were phenomenal in their willingness to adapt to different teaching modes. Food service is always there to provide necessary meals. Educational assistants, monitors, IT, and everyone in the GESD team have shown their support for GESD families. And this is all in capital letters. This accomplishment is very appreciated. Thank you to everyone for your hard work during this difficult time. I think that kind of sums it up for all of us.
Very well said.
Yes, very.
Very well said. Is there any questions about anything there? So overall, it looks like we scored pretty decently. Is there any question? Now, Mr. Martinez, when I first got on the board, this was something, we used something else, didn't we? A different board evaluation?
We have used many different
we've
things,
used a lot
the
of
few
different
times that we've
ones.
done it.
Okay.
So-
And
This is the
so,
one I think that was in this is one of the original
this isn't
ones.
policy.
Yeah, that's not the ASBA one,
No.
no.
And ASBA came up with a different one, and it was much more
It's very complicated.
complicated, and we felt it didn't have to be so complicated. And it was something that they sent to us, we sent back, and then they wanted to send someone back a couple times. And we decided that this is already in policy, and it was free. So we've used this, and I think that this is a pretty decent tool. Maybe in the future we can tweak it to our needs. As you said, we don't have to use everything verbatim. We can tweak it to what we feel we need. But I think that we are, as a board, I think we've been working together very well. I think that we've come leaps and bounds, and especially during this time of COVID. I am just so proud to be on this board and to work with every single person in this room and this whole district. So,
Could I make a recommendation that we assign us as a board 2 goals? One would be to get the superintendent's evaluation from start to finish actually done in the time frame it's supposed to be as one goal. And another goal would be to actually sit down and have a study session and actually work through this document and tweak it before we do the evaluation in October.
I think that's a great idea. It's overdue. It's way overdue. They're both overdue. Do we want to set a date for that? Or do we want to have like a long-term goal date?
Maybe at the first of the year we can look at dates, huh? When we come back in January?
How does our meeting look, Liz, on is it the 14th? That's a long meeting? That's not too heavy? There is an executive session for that one?
Oh, no, I meant just setting a date, taking a look at dates.
So we want to...
Plus some of the stuff relating to the superintendent's evaluation, Liz would have better timeline so that we can at least start from the beginning.
Right.
Why don't we send to you in the next board a timeline of what that looks like?
Yes, please.
Is that something that needs to be done in executive session? When we look at the... No? Okay.
It can be a study session.
Okay. Are there any other questions regarding the governing board self-evaluation? Moving on to discussion item 8B, the Arizona School Boards Association Leading for Equity webinar series. Governing board members and administrators will share information and learning from the Arizona School Boards Association Leading for Equity webinar series. Who attended?
That would be me. So I did provide and typed up for Liz. This was something we had a conversation about a couple meetings back of how to share out the information so that our community also knows that when we do these trainings, we are getting something from it. The very first thing with regards to equity that resonates, and I would hope everybody does, every adult in our system needs to believe that every student is capable and deserving of success. And we know that people come in with biases, whether they mean to or not, but we really, truly need to be that district leading that way. But you can see some of the other thoughts that I had on there. Need to be looking at data with a flashlight, not a hammer. Where are those disparities hiding at? And I think at this level, if we are doing that, we're not looking for gotcha moments. It's going to go a long way in changing the mindset of our community and our staff as to what data is truly being used for.
Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Bartels? Did anyone else attend?
was the only one.
You're the only one.
Thank you for attending and giving us back the information. I was not able to attend that one. Okay, if there are no other further comments or questions, we will move on to item 9, future meetings and events. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, we have scheduled the next governing board meeting is January 14th. That's when you will do the organizational meeting, will take place. That has to be done by January 15th. So we'll do it then. We have employee and student discipline hearing procedures, hearing officer list, and board advocacy discussion listed so far. There will be an executive session that evening. The study session will not be for the proposal that we discussed on boundaries. That will come on January 28th. And then when you were talking about doing the evaluation timeline, I'm looking perhaps if we could get through January, perhaps we'll know after the 28th what other meetings will need to take place. But we know there's a special meeting on February 25th. Perhaps it could be done then. Or once we look at the timelines, it could probably even be pushed to the spring because you'll still make all the timelines that you need. But I think we do have some pressing issues that have to be addressed. That will happen after the January 28th study session.
So basically plan on all special meeting dates being used just in case?
I would recommend that, yes. Mm-hmm.
So both of these, the 14th and the 28th, are going back to regular time, 5:30?
The 28th, is that a special meeting on the 28th? Employment contracts and agreements. So do you want to have the study session ahead of time, at the same time, the 3:30? Or do you want to have it at 5:30? That's the question.
If we do 3:30, I'm good.
I like it at 3:30.
Okay, so 3:30 for the study session on the 28th.
Ms. Martinez, can you do 3:30?
I can find a way to be here at 3:30. If the door is open.
Doors open. We'll make sure that happens.
That seems to be the thing that impacts me the most when I get here. It's always locked.
You just got to know who to call.
Apparently I don't, so.
Okay. Is there any other items anyone wants added? Moving on. Item number 10, summary of current events. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. I'd like to, today we had a systems leadership meeting and we had a surprise that was shared that acknowledged Santina Carrillo, the principal at IMES. She was recognized by Grand Canyon University Education Development as the principal of the month. And so we recognized her. She got a nice little swag bag of everything. She got an award. I tweeted it out. Should be on Facebook now. And also she'll receive $500 gift certificate. So we were happy that she was recognized for that. And we appreciate, yes, what she does. I had the opportunity last night. She sent me an invite to pop into a parent engagement activity they were doing. IMES partners with Joann's Fabric, so I was able to pop into that, and they were working with their families, and students were making blankets, tie blankets, so that was fun to do, and that just speaks to the work that Santina does with her community. So it was nice to have her honored today, so we appreciate that. Just to update, we participated in the food drive. It was difficult because of, the situation we're in, but we were able to at least donate 500 pounds worth of food. We are participating in the Adopt a Kid. Over 87 families, Liz? 50 families. 50 families, 200 students we're doing.
Very nice.
We've been doing St. Mary's Food Bank. We do it bi-monthly, but we had it last Tuesday. We'll do it again on Tuesday. We were so happy we did not run out of food this last Tuesday. And St. Mary's we had a lot of food this time to distribute. We never know what we're going to get, but we did have a lot of food to distribute, so that was nice. And then yesterday we had even though we're in this pandemic, we are still trying to do the things we can for our community. We did the blood drive yesterday here at district office. And each of our schools, even though we are doing it curbside, they're still trying to provide resources to their families curbside. We have schools, for example, that always have donors give for identified kids for the holidays, and that's happening curbside. And then we were so fortunate to have Ames Construction still want to, even though our third graders did not get to travel to Ames Ranch, they all did receive the same huge gift bag and candy bags, and we did that curbside on Monday, and those went to the third grade students at Imes and Smith, and it was nice to see that as well. And then the only update is we are mostly virtual at our school sites, and we're trying to rotate people in and out for least exposure. We did close down all, as you know, special education self-contained classrooms. Teachers are working virtually. We reduced the on-site facilities, and we're keeping those going as long as we don't shut those down. We've had to shut some down due to exposure and COVID, but that's currently what's happening, and we'll continue through that next week. And next week, it just will be the end of the first semester, and it's hard to believe because we've done everything virtually, but just a huge shout out to all of our GESD employees for the work that they've done. As was mentioned in your board evaluation, from classroom teachers to our food services, transportation, our monitors, our aides, our construction crew, buildings and operations, our support staff and educational services, our sales, everyone here doing a remarkable job taking on a new learning platform. And also I wanted to do a special thank you to our families and our parents for their support, in particular to our grandparents who have had to step in and help with their grandchildren while their parents could go to work. And it's been remarkable that what our community has done, and we're most grateful for that. So hopefully we wish everybody a wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year. But more than anything, we wish you health and wellness through this journey that we're in right now. Other than that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott-Jones. Mrs. Smith.
I just want to piggyback on the community aspect that Ms. Agata-Jones was talking about. And I have been thinking about like holiday cheer and how mental health has been affected during this time. And I just have this idea, if in other ways, that maybe we can discuss, or you guys can discuss as leaders, is how can we bring cheer to our community a little bit more? And I thought about like our choir and our band students, and even our art, those that are taking art. If we could give something to our community, because we're doing things virtually, and it would be so nice if we could even just give like art, cards to Glen Cross because they're in our community, and think of other ways that we can give and help the mental health that way. And because I know that we're doing a lot, and all those things that you mentioned are tremendous, and I just hope that we continue this after the holidays and we become more creative. And I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martinez.
I just want to thank all the essential staff workers with the district. Several weeks ago, the district gave out a whole bunch of turkeys, and I got to go down one morning, and we drove down to Food City to go pay for turkeys, and I found out that there is a cash limit on the card that I was using, and so it was quite embarrassing when you're buying $5,000 worth of turkeys and your card gets declined. So it's not the first time it's happened to me, I can guarantee it. But it was kind of cool seeing all those turkeys being given out to all the employees. I wish we could do more for you. You certainly deserve it. I also like to say to our community, be safe out there. We saw the COVID numbers, and coincidentally, there's a spike about 7 days after Thanksgiving, and it's not a coincidence. It's be careful. I know we want to be with family. I know you want to be, close to ones that you love. And Christmas is coming up, and you can't let your guard down, because I guarantee you 7 days after Christmas and then 7 days after New Year, we're going to see some more spikes, and we're going to keep in this situation until either one, we learn better, or two, everyone gets vaccinated. And you get the feeling it's going to be more along the lines of we're going to have to wait till spring or summer till everyone's vaccinated. But be careful out there. Just take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next year. Oh, happy Hanukkah. Tonight, tomorrow? Tonight. Happy Hanukkah to all my Jewish friends out there, and Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bartels.
I'd like to piggyback on, everything that our staff has done since this all started. It has been the longest year ever. And I think even I realized I'm getting to that point of frustration and down in the dumps. And the analogy of a track runner comes to mind. You can see that finish line. You're so close to it, and that's when you just hurt. You're just trying to get to that finish line, and that's where we're at as a society right now in the world with COVID. But I would just hope everybody find those things that make you smile, that you enjoy, that cheer you up, no matter how big or how small. You can make a difference to anyone just by being an ear for them. And, please, please, please be safe over the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Wilson.
Yeah, again, a big thank you to everyone. This past year has not been easy, but we've all worked together, and I think we've done a great job as a district. I think the families have done well, students have done well, teachers, staff have done an amazing job. And so just Merry Christmas, have a nice holiday, and be safe.
Thank you. First, I want to say congratulations to Mr. Martinez on your very first election. Congratulations and welcome to the board officially again. But I'm looking forward to working with you for the next 4 years. And Mrs. Wilson, congratulations on your third. Am I correct? Third, or is it fourth? Fourth. Your fourth election. I think that we're a great board, and I look forward to the next 4 years. So, and I really enjoy sitting next to you all and doing this. Thanks to the community for your trust. And I really want to tell everyone, it's as Mr. Martinez, as everyone's saying, the numbers are just going up. Please, please, please be safe. We can enjoy Christmas at home and count the blessings we do have, and in each other and in our health, and be safe, be healthy, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah.
Happy.
And do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank